to be here. There we go. Okay. So now the queue's live. So it's a pleasure to be here again at a Park Launch event. This is a joint co-sponsored event between Park Launch and Zayn VC. I'm Faisal Aftab, founder and general partner of Zayn VC. We have a very special guest with us, Aly, who's the founder of the Blockchain Founders Fund, which for me is personally a very important topic because it is probably the most important disruption that's taken place on the internet, where money and the entire infrastructure of payments is being disrupted. So we'll let Aly dive into that in a bit, and I'll start asking questions. I'll also do an intro, then I'll do a bit of a brief intro about Park Launch as well. Park Launch is a community of Pakistani expats and investors and tech entrepreneurs started off as a platform on a WhatsApp group and actually to Ghulam Khan alumni group, which then expanded to pretty much not just Pakistanis, but a bunch of international VCs, ranging all the way from Sequoia to any of the big funds. They're part of this group. So it's a great aggregation. And Aly is just Aly Fahad, who's the founder. This is a separate Aly. You guys both spell it the same, ALY. So Aly Fahad, who's the founder, has just raised a round recently, and now the platform is scaling. So I definitely wanted to give a shout out to them as well. And without further ado, we'll jump straight into the discussion. So Aly, if you could kind of give your brief intro, and then we'll jump into questions. Just as a format, I would love to first kind of discuss the macro elements of what's happening, just to kind of create a relatability in the sense that everybody's losing their purchasing power. And then from there, we can dive into the actual infrastructure layers that you're investing in. So please, over to you.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me here, especially at this level of home. So as mentioned, I'm Aly Madhavji, managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. We invest in a bunch of top tier startups, or over 160 startups around the world now. And I'm thrilled to be here. It's first time in Pakistan, so excited to be here.
Welcome. So I guess I'll give my perspective of, we did this in Riyadh as well, by the way. To me personally, blockchain is something that's just words thrown out there like AI, but it's actually something linked to what's happening all around us in terms of geopolitics. And it's actually more geopolitical and linked to the monetary system and reserve currencies versus just being a technology. And to kind of put this in context, we're at a precipice where basically multiple powers have emerged in the world. So we've gone from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And a lot of the underlying stress is on pricing of trade and settlement systems. So if we zoom into 2022, specifically February 24th, 2022, was a date where the current monetary system, which relies on the analog SWIFT system, was put under a lot of stress because we sanctioned Russia collectively as the world. But when you sanction one of the largest superpowers in the world, and the energy producer, it creates a trust deficit in that analog settlement system. And consequently, what we've seen after that is a lot of fractures in the overall system. Now, I'll jump straight into Bitcoin, which is the biggest and most important element of it. To me, when I got into the blockchain phenomenon in 2016, I had gotten into it from a global macro thesis. After the 2008 financial crisis, I actually learned for the first time that gold was important and what inflation is. And so I started hedging with gold. And then in 2014, there were these two guys, the Winklevoss twins, that had created something called Gemini. And they were the original guys in Facebook. So Gemini is a big exchange, a crypto exchange. They kept on going on and on about Bitcoin. And I was making fun of them because I'm like, what is this internet money? Who's going to take this seriously? But lo and behold, 2 years later, it turned out that what they were suggesting as digital gold, it all made sense in terms of inflation showing up, and now it's even more relevant. So I think with that context, I'll hand it over to you. And specifically, what I'd love to first get your macro view in terms of what you're doing in investing in blockchain startups. And then from there, we can deep dive into the different layers. So Aly, please give your view.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first off, I think we both ended up in this space primarily from Bitcoin. And I think part of that, I'm sure, is a nature of trying to, see a system that's broken and is heading in the wrong direction. And, when you look at that and you look at what Bitcoin really does, I think it's really only anti to that system. A lot of people think it's gold as well, or historically thought it's gold. I don't subscribe to that really. Or actually, a lot of people think gold is finite. I look at gold as essentially so gold is essentially an infinite resource, and so when you actually start accounting in the longer run to how much gold there is on Earth plus what's not on Earth, so take things like astral mining and the fact that you can pretty much have $1,000 of gold per person on Earth from just mining a single asteroid. You end up realizing that at some point in your discounted cash flow of history, or like in the future, you're essentially going to discount an infinite number, more or less, back, and it's still going to stay infinite. And therefore, we're actually really talking about very, very long. And it basically returning its maximum price would be the cost to build, right? Which we can do. And therefore, Bitcoin ends up as essentially nothing but really long-term safe asset in that way. Of course, it's still highly volatile, given many other factors. But it is definitely a trend in the system. And we're starting to see countries move almost to the forefront. So the example you brought up, and with especially Russia, you now see pretty much a bunch of major superpowers and other countries that come together saying, let's form the international trade currency that supports the US dollar. And this is one of the big thing that's happening right now. And I think it's going to continue to grow. We're starting to see major assets like oil and other assets that are being priced not in US dollars, whether that's being priced in some other funding on the currency or baskets, things like that even start to happen. So definitely some pretty big challenges I think ahead on that front. And we're starting to see that as well in the inflation and how that impacts so many different places from governments and central banks not necessarily approaching a lot of this responsibly, right? Much like at blockchain founders and we invest in venture startups, and so we've got companies building innovations on top of Bitcoin, on top of other blockchains, and that can be all sorts of things. So it runs all the way from supply chain to education, all the way to the innovation specifically, things like trading, all sorts of different things of the crypto side.
So when you say innovation on top of Bitcoin, and I, by the way, I agree with you, Bitcoin is now officially more scarce than gold's declared inflation. So it's much more constrained, and I do think in the long run, given the cap of 21 million, it's a big deal in terms of the price potential. But when we say like for, most of us here that I invest in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and just tokens. So I don't really many times get the infrastructure level understanding. So I know STX is something that's built on top of Bitcoin for family offices and wealth storage. Give me some examples from the real world, like something I would see in, let's say, finance. What are you looking to invest in there?
Yes, I mean, on the finance front, there's a few different things, right? So, I mean, there goes to very specific things on blockchain, which are the innovations to help things around like trading and liquidation protection and creating derivatives on Bitcoin or creating state to help facilitate trading more effectively, right, between on. And then you've got, even further, you've got things like tokenizing real assets, which are what a lot of people talk about. BlackRock's been talking about it very often, very famous, et cetera, saying trillions of dollars are basically tokenized by BlackRock and partners. And this is a very interesting space because that starts to blend, I think, more of the Web3 world and the traditional world more effectively. And one of the big problems that I see is access a lot of these yields right now. If you're in the US or you're in London or something like this, it's actually fairly easy to access these products. But essentially what's happening in other parts of the world, whether that's Pakistan or parts of Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, et cetera, access then all of these types of products as an ordinary individual, it's actually very difficult. And so the democratization of these products through real world assets is actually going to allow anyone in seconds to go access products at different yields all over the world that I think is going to help a lot. Of course, there's still going to be things around KYC and AML, so checks on who it is and anti-money laundering checks, and I'm sure they're going to block out certain countries, et cetera. But I think it still changes the landscape of access to different types of financial instruments.
Absolutely. So let's go a little bit deeper into this geographies you're investing in. Are you investing globally, or are you specifically focused in Middle East, South Asia, Far East? I mean, what specifically where are you deploying?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we invest all around the world. We do look at blockchain as a very different to the way traditional startups happen. So with Web3, depending on what your business is, you actually in large part launch globally on day one, which is very different from the way if, say, you're running a supply chain company or e-commerce company. Generally, you're launching in one part of one city, and then like you're going to expand to that city, then you're going to expand to that region, then you're going to expand to that across that country, and then to the next country. With Web3, oftentimes, depending on what you're building, you might actually be trying to go out and get global customers on day one. And that actually changes the way you scale a startup as well.
There's no borders, basically.
Exactly. And so, with us, we've got now about out of the 160 companies, probably about 35% of them are in North America, about 30% in Asia, 20% in Europe. We've got companies across Latin America, Africa, Australia. So literally all over. We do have one Pakistani company called Breshna, and one of the founders is here. Yeah, so Riz is here. There we go at the back, which is a no-code gaming platform. Right? So it's essentially a Canva for video games. Anyone can build a video game in under 10 minutes. They've got about 200,000 games created now all around the world. They're partnered with Jazz and many other incredible companies across the region and the world.
So I can't help myself but come back to the economic consequences, because I think everybody's can relate to it these days. One of the biggest things that we're seeing, and I want to kind of, I guess, are you hedging? Are you investing only in startups, or are you hedging your own fund by deploying a little bit in Bitcoin, keeping a 10%, 5% allocation? I know the LPAs are really broad these days, where you can actually allows you to do that. So before I jump into the macros, is that something you're considering, or do you only take a risk on?
So this is an interesting one. So we only take risk on, and the reason for this is we've got a number of major LPs around the world. A lot of names you would know, many I won't disclose, but and then our other investors include like financial institutions. We have a central bank. We have one of the largest telcos in Asia, et cetera. And many of the investors that want exposure to Bitcoin already have plenty of exposure to Bitcoin. So from the fund, we don't actually put money into Bitcoin, but we've got many startups, for example, that are building layer twos on Bitcoin, stable coins on Bitcoin, all sorts of other things that end up giving us obviously direct exposure to Bitcoin, but then many have correlated exposure through different, if they're launching a token, if they're, building on all sorts of different chains and technology in the space.
Okay. So I guess one of the things I wanted to highlight also, and we can talk a little bit macro, I think you'll enjoy that as well. So what's happening globally is that once we've accelerated into geopolitical fissures and currency stress, when you really look at what's happening with all the conflicts, it's really trade blockades that are taking place. Whether you look at the Red Sea, whether you look at the Persian Gulf, there's also stress on the Straits of Malacca, where India has positioned on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This technically links into Bitcoin and crypto. It actually feeds energy in this direction, because eventually people are going to look for alternate settlement systems that are not dominated by one segment of the world versus the other. And so one of the reasons why you're seeing a massive inflation in cryptocurrencies, along with housing, the stock market, is because governments are fundamentally printing money to sustain. And if you look at the M2, M1, and M3, which is money supply at the Federal Reserve, which is the most powerful central bank, as goes the Fed, so does the world in terms of interest rates. So what's happening is that the rate of inflation in terms of currency debasement, which is your loss of purchasing power, in dollars today is about 12%. If you actually calculate that out, streamline. So that means that if you're getting a yield, let's say you're investing in a bond at 5.5%, technically you have a negative yield. And the same thing goes for the stock market. So the average hedge fund returns 15%. And so you're barely getting your annual, this is an annualized return. So you're barely getting like a 3% spread there. So it becomes almost imperative. In my personal opinion, you cannot survive this inflationary cycle if you're not hedged with either big tech or the likes of Bitcoin and Ethereum and this technology, because and obviously along with Nvidia and AI and all this stuff, because that's the only velocity of growth of money that can offset the pace with which we're debasing. So Ali, in terms of your thought process, I would love to get your take on, how do we offset, how do we take a hedge with Bitcoin, and what's your thought about, what I just said in terms of money supply?
So it's a good question, and I think it even goes much beyond that, right? So, I mean, the U.S., I think like you mentioned, sort of like a very large increase in money supply, but this is the case pretty much on most central banks around the world, and it's irresponsible. And what's happening is even the numbers that are being reported in terms of inflation differ a fair bit from these numbers. And I think all of us that have walked into a store or a grocery store, a number of times over the last decade, realize that it's probably a lot higher than the 3%, 4%, maybe 8% that you got told over that period. And so this is actually a very big problem. Investing in AI depends what you're investing in. If you're going big tech, I think it's a little bit safer. If you're going AI startups, obviously similar to Web3 or blockchain, there's just a lot of noise, right? So there's a lot of scams. There's a lot of things that you don't maybe fully understand that don't pan out. I think there's a lot of risk that you're taking as well because of let's call it overvalued companies. And so you got to also be careful, I think, on that front, because there is a premium that's coming along right now with, you say you're an AI company, you're already raising before you got a product, probably at 20 million, maybe 50 million, maybe 100. I mean, we've seen all sorts of numbers. We see pre-revenue, pre-product companies, even out of the Web3 space, already raising in the hundreds of millions, some of them in the billions. I won't name names because we may have invested in some of them, but so you've got
Give it to me on a piece of paper. Front for you.
And some of them we think are incredible companies, and they're going to do even better. But you do end up with, I would say, some of these companies that are probably overvalued when you're trying to do some sort of more traditional, cash flow based, valuation metric or something like that. And so you do got to be careful. But there are huge opportunities, I think, to hedge this risk. And especially when you think about something like Bitcoin, I think it's like a great thing to have for your kids, your family, for the long run, right? Like, we're looking at this and saying, hey, there's 21 million here, and that's the finite supply. We think this is actually an incredible investment long term from a personal standpoint, just given all of those other challenges that we've been talking about the entire time here.
No, and, I mean, if you look at the total market cap of real estate bonds and stocks and investable assets in the world, roughly, I think it's $200 to $300 trillion is what the assessment is. What we should expect is that gold's current market cap in the world is roughly 10 trillion. And I know you don't like comparing it to gold, but we're on the same page. I mean, it's way more scarce than gold, hence the pump. If gold goes to 2,500, Bitcoin goes to 40,000, right? On the scarcity element. But in terms of the if you just do a simple mathematical analysis, right? If Bank of America projects that gold should be around $3,600 over the coming 2 to 3 years, given the inflationary cycle, that's almost a double, right? So that you'd expect gold to jump to about 20 trillion from 10 trillion market cap. I realistically think that's not going to happen. I think a lot of that is getting sucked in by crypto. And that's what you're actually seeing, where the sentiment that should have gone into gold and silver is now actually moving to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then a lot of bad coins as well. But it's an overall market cap. So just to put things in context, in terms of quantum of money, in Pakistan, we tend to worry about or we're actually celebrating a $1.1 billion loan from the IMF. And frankly, the world has changed. It's like Dr. Evil in the 70s. If any of you watched Austin Power, when they took him out of cryogenics, and he tried to hold the world hostage for $1 million and then was informed it's not a lot of money. So it's something very similar, the type of money we're actually, signing ourselves away for, but that's irrelevant. But just a quantum would be that crypto was roughly in 2016, the total market cap was, I think, maybe $80 billion. Not even, I think it was less than that. Um, it it peaked in 2021 to $2.8 trillion, which was the last cycle. And then we went into a bear market, it dropped to a little bit below $1 trillion. It's $0.7 trillion or so, and it's projected to go to around six by probably sometime next year, bit later this year or next year. We'll see. So what's happening is that it's shifting and sucking value out of other assets in the world. And so it's very important, even for Pakistan as a country, to consider doing some level of a hedge. We already have billions of dollars of gold in our central bank, but this is other countries that have done it have actually fared pretty well. That's a fairly easy solution to hedge. I think I gave somebody, this is a bit of a quack idea, but I'd suggested that in 2018, if the country had just put in about 100 to $200 million at Bitcoin at $3,500, just today we would have almost printed about $6 or $7 billion out of thin air versus waiting for the structural reforms. So just some food for thought. And I'm sharing this with all young people, especially on the live stream, because it's sometimes you can't solve problems of a nation if you don't think outside the box and you keep going back to old historical plans. And so we need people in this room and online to kind of think outside the box a little bit as well. So, yep.
Jumping in on this actually, so the UN actually approached us to help look at blockchain and crypto could help achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals and help alleviate poverty. And part of that, we're working with a number of central banks around the world. And it was actually pretty fascinating because a lot more central banks than you might think are actually pretty heavily involved here. And many of the bankers personally are very invested in this space. But we're even seeing our own fund where we've got a central bank now invested in our fund, which is not something you think of, right? And you're seeing, I think, a lot more of this. You're seeing a lot of experiments around CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies. That's a whole nother discussion. But I think there's some challenges around
it. Because it's very important. I think that's the natural. So India is looking at it. Pakistan's exploring the idea that it's just in ideation stages. I think it is important to talk about that because it creates a new form of monetary policy in terms of the velocity of money. It's not just interest rates, it's programmable money. So, we've heard all sorts of things about the IMF SDR equivalent of a digital token. The Fed has FedNow, the European Central Bank. Could you give people a little bit of a flavor of what this is in terms of how is that different from your traditional, analog rupee or dollar?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my take is maybe a little bit more concerning on this topic than many might be. But when you think about where a central bank digital currency goes, it basically allows, as you mentioned, programmable money. But what it's going to allow is more transparency to the authorities, right? So right now, when you, for example, do transactions, digital wise, it's tracked obviously, but maybe not to the level still, just given where tech is and some of it catching up for government central banks, where they're looking into everything you're doing. But it's obviously going in that direction, right? Think about what's happening in countries with social credit, et cetera. When you think about then how this can be used, if you could track everything digitally, and then you've got basically almost like cash becoming more and more extinct, right? Everything's going to be tracked. And you've already got countries where if you're doing the wrong things with your money, like for example, you're buying alcohol too much, your social credit might get impacted, or you're buying, you're not, like, you have kids and you're not buying diapers and milk in China, like it actually affects your social credit. And so these things are actually being tracked on your purchases. And over time, if governments want to use information around your purchases more against you, this is going to be a bigger and bigger problem. And so that transparency actually can really backfire, I think, in this case. And it won't be transparency to everybody. It's going to be transparency, obviously, to the government. So this isn't like a public chain that's gonna run these. And I think then if you think about how governments can use that to go after like political oppositions, this is going to be a big problem, right? When we were writing the report with the UN, this was something that we may not have been allowed to include. But one of the theories around CBDCs was that governments need to be allowed to be equally or more corrupt if they're going to launch these than they currently are. Because if they don't have an advantage from using this, then why are they implementing it? And that theory was not liked. But I think this is something to actually be concerned about going forward, and how this actually ends up playing out, not in the way that people are expecting or how it's going to be sold to people.
No, I mean, I agree with 100%. A lot of my friends here can attest to what I think of actually technology, but I won't go into that. Then I can't run a venture capital fund. So now, yeah, so look, so that's one element, and of course, all of us, I think our generation particularly, we've seen the cusp of the world where we had more freedom of speech, and I call it the cusp generation. My children, Gen Alpha, I mean, they're 8 and 10. They're going to grow up as digital native. They're already digital natives. So for them, this world is going to be, I mean, they don't care what the government knows about them, right? They're posting their like breakfast pictures and whatnot. Not my kids, but the other generation. They're still a little too young for social media. But the good side of it, I guess I'll bring it in the case of Pakistan, right? So to me, Pakistan, there's no other way to get out of the mess we're in, unless we demonetize the rupee and start pushing digital payments. And it's a very easy playbook, right? If you look at China 2006, they demonetized when QR codes became ubiquitous. And Ahmed later will talk a little bit on that because he's on the forefront.
So I lived in China for a while. I don't know if you know that. I did one of my masters at Tsinghua University. And it's quite fascinating because over the last 10 plus years living in between China and Southeast Asia, I basically don't carry cash anywhere. Like basically have not carried cash in 10 years, don't carry a bank card either. And everything's just digital. And then you go to the US and they don't take credit card even at some places, or Apple Pay, but they don't have QR codes or any of that stuff. It's actually quite surprising. And I think you're going to see in a very short amount of time, a lot of the world, especially, places like Pakistan, that are just going to leapfrog and do what places like China did, which is just incredible. I mean, in China, going around, people won't even take cash. So they're going to be like, what do I do with this? Right?
And in India, I mean, if you just look at India, and the reason why I love India as an example, it's our closest comparable in terms of behavior patterns, the structure of the government, being both former British colonies. So when you look at them, they demonetized in 2016. Modi got a lot of slack for that initially, but now he's basically kind of hailed by the entire business community there, because the QR codes effectively have documented a fair chunk of their economy and done financial inclusion. So I think Pakistan, whenever we're ready to do it, when we do it, that's actually the gold mine, because we're going to leapfrog in our documentation and bring the cash economy online. So that's the positive side of documentation and, of course, control, but it helps.
I think the access is very big, right? So one of my challenges around the traditional financial system, right? And I know we were talking about sanctions and stuff, but outside of all that, just think about how the world's moved. We're at a spot where 1 billion people, despite all of that, are left out of the global financial system. And this is a huge problem, right? And this is for a number of reasons, whether it's, KYC or no identities, or, other factors that they're not rich enough, or they don't want to be they're not included by the system, right? And when you take what blockchain is really doing at its core, it essentially creates a banking system where everyone can have borrowing, lending, and savings products, which are your core banking products, instantly, right? In one click of a button, no identity, etc. Now that does create challenges when you're thinking about like money laundering, and well, how do you basically balance these two around creating access, but also making sure you're not doing things like terrorist financing, or things that aren't allowed or permitted. And I think this is a fine balance, though, because I also think the world's gone in a direction where it's gone too far, where they've cared more about, things around like anti-money laundering, which is important. They've cared so much about this that they're okay with cutting 1 billion people out of the system. And that's not okay to me, right? And so this is actually where there's huge opportunities when you bring in these types of technologies and you just unlock growth for everybody in that country or in that region.
I mean, on-chain metrics show the Pakistanis are very active, even though we're not supposed to be on cryptocurrency. So I think what we'll do is is let's make it a little bit more interactive, and we'll start talking to the audience. We've got Dr. Malia Lodi here. We've also got Amir Ibrahim, and we've got Amir Hashmi as well. So let's we'll let you guys say a few words and ask some questions. Can we get an extra microphone here? Is it already here? Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you?
Okay. Well, it's really a pleasure to see so much talent and dynamism in this room. And I'm so grateful that you asked me. This is not what I do for a living. It's not even my day job, but I'm here to learn. And also, I think Faisal had this in mind that he wanted to ask me to say a few words about the overall investment climate in Pakistan. So I just say a few words, and then I'm happy to also join in the interactive part. I'm fascinated by what you do, by the way, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, we're so proud of people like you because you're on the cutting edge of technology. And of course, Faisal has done amazing work himself. And I have a little disclosure because it's important. I'm only here because I'm Faisal's best friend's mother. I'm not here because of any other sort of expertise that I have, but he was obliged to just invite me. So overall investment climate, I think Pakistan is in a much better place than it was last year, clearly, because we were teetering on the brink of sovereign default on our foreign debt. And pretty much all of last year was full of uncertainty, both political and economic. So we walked away from that crisis. But I think what the government will have to do, you were talking about the IMF, and the IMF has a long list of asks, heavy duty ones at that. These are not going to be easy for any government to do. So I think for the government, what is important is to see beyond the IMF program as well, because the narrative on television at the moment is all about the IMF. But if our economic policy, the end all and be all of our economic policy is just the fund, we're not going to go anywhere. Yep. So the fund program has to be integrated into an economic vision that our leaders need to evolve and an economic plan, which should have many elements. But I think the most important in the near term is to, market sentiment has improved, no question about that. But the most important is to build the kind of business confidence first here and then amongst foreign investors. I mean, the two play off each other. You can't have foreign investors interested in the country unless your own business community also steps up to the plate. So basically, I think this is the challenge for the government. Our macroeconomic fundamentals remain very, let's say, vulnerable. Just about every trend has not been going in the right direction. But we can turn it around. I mean, there's no question, because there are many countries, Faisal, you were talking about, some examples in our neighborhood and elsewhere. There are many countries that have used crisis as opportunities and just turned it all around. We could do that too. And I think one of the areas that the government should also look at, but not in a perfunctory way, just ticking the box, but in a more substantive way, and that is to see how technology, and I'm not just talking about one type of technology, in general, how digital technology can be an enabler for Pakistan to leapfrog in its path to development and progress. Again, there are many examples across the world where countries have done this. But this too requires the kind of focus on what is our comparative advantage? What is it that we can do to ensure that people have digital access? Because the one thing, I would recommend to all of you who haven't had a look at it, is a UNDP report on the role that technology can play, or digital technology can play in Pakistan's development. It's an extraordinary report, because what it does is it lists the policy measures the government should take in order to get the country to move forward. And it also uses data to show that in our country, the districts that have high digital access, or let's say adaptation, they're adapting to technology, are the districts that are doing very well in terms of human development, health, education, and so on. So you can see the correlation very clearly. And I think one of the myths that needs to be also broken is that somehow technology is going to take away jobs. It's actually the opposite. It's going to help us create more jobs, depending on how the kind of strategic investment that we make as a government also. But essentially, the initiative will have to come from the private sector. And I think for the government, they should just ensure that there's an enabling environment. And again, I'll close on this. I think it's a good sign that, countries from the Gulf are showing interest. But I think, again, we need to ensure that this interest is actually translated into sort of runs on the board, if I can use a cricket metaphor. And talking about cricket, I think lastly, I would simply say that we need to fix the politics. Because, it's not always the economy stupid. It's not always, but it's also the politics which needs to be fixed. Because the one thing that deters investors, both here and abroad, is, obviously the lack of political certainty and expectation that there will be policy continuity, even if there is political disruption. So I think these are the areas that we need to kind of address. And, I'm pretty confident that, Pakistan has an enormous amount of people who have the knowledge, the expertise, the capability, and above all, the commitment. Because at the end of the day, you've got to be committed to your own country to ensure that it is on the right path. So with that, thank you.
And in fact, even the IMF today, I was just reading a headline before, said that the biggest risk to Pakistan's stabilization is political uncertainty. So not to repeat that we should be following only the IMF, we should have independent thought. Dr. Lodi, one thing you said, which I'm going to ask Amir, because one of the most important things happening in Pakistan is that actually the lower income demographic in this country is actually very digital. And if you look at Jazz Cash and Easy Pesa, most of the urban domestic staff, as well as your lower middle income demographic, they're sending remittances and transferring back and forth using Jazz Cash and Easy Pesa. And so I think we're already pretty far ahead. Amir, I'd love to get your take on it. I think yeah.
Thanks, Faisal. Yeah, I'd like to connect a few dots over here. There's the macro, IMF we've talked about. We always keep on talking about it. There's a technology blockchain. There's somebody like us, Jazz, which is both one of the largest foreign investors in the country. We've invested more than $10 billion over the last 3 decades. And now we are transitioning from being a monolithic telecom operator to being more of a technology conglomerate, which is servicing 3 lines of businesses: financial services, connectivity, and then platforms. So I can help connect some of these dots. I think whatever at a national level, I don't think the country is going to progress only because of intervention. The technology sometimes will push us forward, not because of the government, but in spite of the government. So I don't think we should be too disappointed if the right interventions don't happen. Technologies do overcome that. Even the case of about political stability, there are many countries which are politically stable, many changes of government, but they still move forward. And Pakistan certainly has the resilience and has shown that. I can talk a little bit about our own transition. And you talked about Jazz Cash. Pakistan is massively underserved when we talk about banking or access to financial instruments. More than 75% of Pakistani adults still lack a bank account. There are 33 banks, and they predominantly just service the government. So that layer in terms of as basic a need as payments to something which is more towards financial well-being, whether it's savings, insurance, investments, that has never really happened. You also gave examples about India, and India has done a good job, but it's not only about demonetization. It's also about their UPI program and now how they're actually forcing. There, the government is actually subsidizing zero MDR, those who are familiar with the word. And here we are actually expecting the private sector to actually keep on absorbing the costs. And that would not happen. The startups can't do that. Even the large organizations cannot do that. Before going more into the blockchain thing, I think it's really important, and you did reference to, the people and the lower segment. Sometimes the innovation actually comes from bottom of the pyramid, right? There's a need to transfer funds. There's a need to find an alternative to keeping money under the pillow. And the innovation started happening when I was back there at Telenor 10, 12 years ago, came up with EasyPesa and now Jazz Cash. And whoever is going to be next, there's a welcome edition of 5 digital banks, but even that is not going to be enough. One of the basic problems we're going to solve is really how do we make payments? And in Pakistan, you're still making about 98% of your payments in cash. And that is a serious issue. We have about 3 million small, micro, medium enterprises. Only about 3,000 of them are QR enabled through JazzCash, which is the largest QR enabler in the country. And that's just not going to be enough. So there is places where you actually need some level of governmental intervention. You have to encourage digital options. Digital always by definition has to be cheaper than cash. And you have to make incentives, just like Punjab did with, like whenever you make a payment using a digital means, the GST is about 5% as opposed to 17%. So these are positive interventions, but we can't just stop over there. We have to make sure that this is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Cash, whether it's Jazz Cash or any other digital means, it has to be universally accepted. And I think it's not just decades, it's going to happen a whole lot quicker. It can happen significantly faster if the government is on the same page in terms of seeing the vision. And I appreciate that there are reports from UNDP and there could be many other reports from GSMA, many other things. I think we all intuitively know the answer. The question is who's going to do it? We don't need more conviction. We need more execution. Nobody over here in this room, or even if you go outside, if you go and talk to them that, listen, do you think digital helps? Yeah, the whole world is now getting converted to a tech suffix. So education is becoming edtech, finance is becoming fintech, advertising is becoming adtech, agriculture is agritech. We all know that it's going to happen. Are we at the pace where we need to be? And regrettably, perhaps we're not. That's or a reason for us to get demoralized, disappointed. We just have to work harder, wake up tomorrow with fresh energy. Just like many of the people in this room who are entrepreneurs, they know how many doors have been shut on them. I'm sure that's happened to you multiple times. So we as a community, whether it's business leaders, individuals of a nation, we just need to have that optimism, resilience, and keep on pushing back every single door that shuts on us, whether that's from government or from a corporate sponsor or anybody else who's just saying no to the future of technology. It's going to happen. Now let's take a pivot towards blockchain. And obviously blockchain till a few years ago was a solution looking for a problem. I think we've identified a few problems, and certainly within identity, it's really helping. So when you're making payments from another country, cross-border payments, blockchain and identity management can really help. We use it to eliminate fraud. Initially, we are very good, in this world and everywhere else also, in terms of socially engineered fraud. And that started happening with EasyPesa and JazzCash. So we have used technology like blockchain to make sure that we can actually trace the transactions and make sure that we start nipping in the bud. Otherwise, what happens is that people start having a negative opinion about emergent technologies. And people then prefer cash and they want to see that it has been delivered to the recipient. So there's a lot of technology that can be used to make fintech, payments, lending, all these things a lot more secure by knowing that it's actually going to the person that's intended for. And here the collaborators are going to be your national ID card system through NADRA, central bank, which is going to encourage this thing, and all the people who perhaps are in this room more interested in blockchain, but overall generally in fintech. So I'd conclude by saying that, listen, we're going to move forward. The government, I would expect them perhaps just to get rid of the roadblocks. If they can't come up with a lot of positive interventions, at least the negative ones that exist, just get rid of them. Digital or telecom is not a sector, it's a cross-sector enabler. It will help every sector, right? So the broadband layer is an essential layer for your digital infrastructure. We as a country are still a little bit behind. And as a captain of the industry, I don't feel great with our internet speeds or how many cities and towns do we cover. We're still living in the 4G generation, but whether it's 4G or 5G, customers expect, and the citizens expect faster, expansive, affordable internet, which is universally available. So we've got certain obligations to fulfill when it comes to our citizens. Then on top of that, I think where we are as a country, digitization of the economy is the next big opportunity. I get less excited about running a telecom company. I get super excited running a fintech. I mean, the opportunities that we have, and I'll throw in a few numbers for clothing. I have to actually give a little bit of a sales pitch about my company also. So we process close to 8 million.
And you didn't sponsor this event, just to be clear.
I didn't sponsor this event. We do about 8 million transactions a day on JazzCash, which is more than 50% of the total transactions that happen on a smartphone. That competes with, Easy Pesa and the 33 commercial banks and everything else. We issue 150,000 loans a day. Right now, these are micro loans. These are loans not necessarily to buy a new iPhone cover. These are loans that a rickshaw driver gets in the morning for 10,000 rupees. He gets his customers, he gets the fares from those customers, and he pays it back the next day. So he has bridged that thing. So these are the productive loans that we need. And we're building a big loan book. And we are using both AI and ML because of the fact that we sit on a huge data lake. We're actually refining on how effectively can we lend. And you can come up with differentiated lending prices because those customers who've got better credit scoring will get a lower rate compared to the ones who's borrowing it for the first time. There's a lot of excitement. And I can't be not optimistic about the future with or without the government interventions. I think that would be a welcome cherry on the top. But really, when I look at people over here in this room and elsewhere, the energy is just going to take us forward.
No, agreed 100%. I mean, it's actually all the young founders that are here. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I'm middle-aged now, so I'm more jaded.
If you're middle-aged, I'm
not a young founder, man. It's so a lot of like every time I get jaded and start like looking at the future in a much more bleak manner, what I notice is the optimism of the younger founders in this room and throughout the country. It's really amazing, and we're a very resilient nation. You can throw so much at Pakistan, but the people here just keep coming back and keep fighting. So with that, I'll actually open it up to the founders as well. If anybody is interested in asking a question, or if there's any questions from online. So I guess we can just pass around. Amir, if you want to say a few words, if you have any questions, given that you're also in the tech space.
Thanks. Working. Thanks, Faisal, for the invite, and of course, Ali from Park Launch. I think I'll sort of use what our four speakers said and give a framework on the technology ecosystem of Pakistan. Ali, your expertise on blockchain. Dr. Lodi mentioned the word enabling environment and political stability for Pakistan to go ahead. Amir's talking about digitization, and you spoke about the youth. You addressed the youth, Faisal, on being innovative. So the numbers that we had in the last government, we had about 170 million under the age of 40, right? So this room's full of them. And Park Launch actually is only about 2.5 years old, I think, 3 years. And it just blossomed with technology entrepreneurs globally joining, particularly from the US. So my opinion is that blockchain, if Pakistan needs to move ahead on government reforms, Dr. Lodi, you'd really need to know blockchain in the ministries. We have about 45 ministries. That's very big size for our country. And a lot of consultants and experts have looked at Pakistan, think tanks have looked at Pakistan, including US and Chinese and even Russian think tanks, and bring down the ministries to about 20 and put them on a blockchain, right? Our process of approvals in the government of Pakistan, there's these, all the youth should pick up a document called the 1973 Rules of Business. And that's how our government operates. So yes, 1973, bilkul, it's 2024. So linking that to technology and blockchain. So it's a very simple exercise, and 2 governments in the past tried to do, including the last one. So one, which I think all 3 of you, Faisal, Amir, and Dr. Lodi said, intent, and who will do it, right? So you can do it, but who will? And for technology, we've promoted many universities and the government and the corporate community. We started it at a university called NASDAQ, the triple helix model, right? So until the power corridors of the academia, because we do have over 250 universities, it's a 60-40 split, and they're your powerhouse, right? You need students in your technology ecosystem to build entrepreneurs and get innovation. It's not going to happen with the 65 plus. I think the government is considering moving the age to 63 to 65, right? So you're not going to get innovation there. You're not going to get reforms there. So until we don't use technology solutions for the socio-economic benefits, you won't grow as fast as you want. I'll use the word leapfrogging using tech. So if you build ecosystems within the country that are triple helix, government, academia, and corporate, like NUST, 700 acres. There's a tech zone in Islamabad. Amir and I were just talking. 50 acres is sitting empty for the last 2.5 years. It's sanctioned as a tech zone. And the tech zone means 10-year tax holiday. It means import-free equipment. We don't have quantum computing. Ali, in Pakistan, one of the reasons is to import supercomputers in Pakistan is it's expensive because of duty, right? So you don't get a lot of import. You can't do chip design in Pakistan because we were trying to get chip design manufacturing sites in the tech zones. So a lot of the laws is something some of you must have heard about. The Special Technology Zone Authority has passed the legislation for the ecosystem. So from a startup to a VC, there's one in Haripur, Karachi hasn't opened them. There's one in Lahore. There's 4 in Islamabad. The Air Force has taken all the airports and turned them into it. Hopefully they, inshallah, should do well. So I think concluding on what Amir, Faisal, Ali, and Dr. Lodi said, until we don't get the youth involved in technology innovation, it'll be tough to get economic growth. So this is the right form. I think Ali and Faisal, you sponsoring this at Pack Launch Day is excellent. They should be encouraged to use technology for innovation for socioeconomic development. So you can make money as an entrepreneur, fine, but also add to your nation with the socioeconomic development. So that's, I think, my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. We can, if anybody, if people aren't too shy, we can send a mic back if anybody has questions, because we want you guys to interact as well, and not just us speaking. So, okay, here we go. You're next. We'll bring it.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Am I audible? Yeah, I'm audible. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Rizwan, the co-founder of Rational.io. Ali is one of our leading investors. Just wanted to establish on a few points here. Since we've been talking about the fintech environment, and since we're talking about the ease of doing business in Pakistan, we are as a US-based entity. We're 30 people strong in Pakistan. We're sending out remittances, pure remittances every month. The problem that we face or our teams face in Pakistan is predominantly receiving money. Your traditional banks, they take 15 to 20 days at times. The transactions go back and whatnot. On the other hand, fintech apps like Wise, PayPal, Pioneer, you can only operate through Wise, by the way, in Pakistan. And at times what happens is Wise will stop making transactions in Pakistan due to the fluctuations in the rates.
Haven't they already capped them? Like, I think
they've capped the transactions already. Though that's like a good day on Wise. There are times when the transactions are capped altogether. You cannot make transactions to Pakistan. So the thing is, this is in the benefit of the government to provide ease of doing business. This is pure remittance coming into the country, and that is not reaching the team. So you have people on Fiverr, you have people on Behance that want to do projects with international firms, but the major limitation that they face is the ease of doing transactions or receiving money. I think fintech apps, and now another limitation, I'll just close with this one, is that even if you shift to the blockchain, even if you shift to crypto, there is no way of getting a hold of that cash in Pakistan. So this is a question to all of you, I guess. So what's the solution there? Because it's very easy to say, yes, we will move forward. But we've been in this business for 3 years now, and we've been facing this since the very first day, and it has not improved. It's the way it is. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll touch on that and then feel free to jump in. So there's this concept in banking called de-risking. And basically what it means is international banks, because when they send the money to Pakistan, so say an international bank, JP Morgan, sends money to Pakistan, they need to basically answer where that money goes to that bank. And because of that, and if there's not that level of transparency from the local banks to the international bank will actually stop working with the local bank. And this actually is a very big problem that we worked on a bunch with the UN. And actually, this is a problem in a lot of emerging markets because that lack of transparency on that next step and knowing where it goes and making sure that it's, doesn't go to the wrong places, et cetera. They just cut them out of the system. And so when you use things like crypto or blockchain-based transfers, you can actually solve a lot of this. But then, like you were saying, you need that sort of off-ramp to go back to cash or go back into the banking system because you do need to connect the whole thing. So I agree. I think that this is a challenge. I'm sure there's ways to do it here, but probably not, super kosher ways to do it here entirely, right? So it's a challenge, but I sort of wanted to explain how de-risking works a little bit just for context and like why that's happening.
Is it on? Okay. I think we do have a banker here, maybe Adnan from HBL. So maybe you want to answer this. I won't put you on the front, I'm just kidding. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Which part of it?
Well, it's all the remittance, like basically the biggest issue.
What Aly's saying is correct, because as you all may be aware, when I came back to Pakistan and I think the ambassador knows, we had a big issue with FATF. And we had to close down our operations in the US. So when I joined, I think I was Audie's first and only hire. We had to deal with this issue. So it's 100% correct. I mean, there's not much to say there, except for the fact that when one transaction goes bad, all the counterparts just raise their hands, okay, I'm out of here. So we have to be extremely careful. And I know it's very painful for businesses who want to operate in this environment. It's very different in every market, but Pakistan, because of where we are and the geopolitical situation we've gone through and we're still in, red flags go up very, very quickly. So that's on the remittance piece.
No, I think that's a fair point. It's a process, it's an evolution. To me, everything is an opportunity. I'm actually happy we're still 97% cash. That just means a lot of the companies we're investing in have an upside. So frankly, it's like a gold mine sitting where this is heading in the long run. I guess any other questions? I feel like everybody's really scared. No, there we go. Okay.
Hi, so this is working. So I think we've too much about the financial side of it, the blockchain but there's like a whole world outside of finance, and that's powered by Web3 and blockchain. And that's where I wanted to come in and ask Ali that how are they looking at those opportunities in terms of the value for the society? Because we see as of now that Web3 is mostly governed by the narratives and rather than the value. And that's why most of the projects which could be bringing the value in terms of anything which is substantial for the society are not that height, if I would say. And most of the times what's happening is that there's a narrative built by few influencers online, and then there are communities and everybody's pulling the money out of Ethereum and then putting in that one and then taking it out after one run, and then there's a whole cycle running there. So beyond the narratives, how are you looking at the Web3 space, which can ultimately become maybe the foundation for this stabilized sort of society? Because for us in Pakistan, yes, we have a problem with the finance, but then there are a lot of other things that we cannot do without, for example, we could be going to a government office and we could not get a license very easily, but because of the decentralized and the blockchain, amongst the ecosystem of the government, we could probably get licenses easier than later. I know I'm talking about the licenses, and the telecom partners wouldn't really like it because they have to drive through a lot to get them. But that's what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me touch on a few points. So out of the 160 companies that we invest in, there's sort of three different categories, right? So one is, let's call it like very degen crypto stuff, right? So that's where you've got like innovations on Bitcoin, you've got innovations around trading, like all sorts of other like, hyper technical protocols, things like this, right? The second category is companies that service the crypto industry. So if you're talking about like on and off ramps or like other challenges around payments, et cetera, using the technology, that's where that second category is. The third category, probably what you're asking about, right? So the third category is real world applications of blockchain, right? And how does that impact everyday people in their lives? And so, and some people call this Web 2.5, by the way, so if that term comes up. And there's a lot of really, really interesting applications here, right? So first, we mentioned real world assets before, right? And so I was one of the original advisors to a company called Polymath. We invented the term security token. A whole lot of innovation sort of come out in the industry after that. We wrote the standard on ERC 1400, which is essentially what all the real world asset stuff's based on. So when you see Larry Fink talking about bringing all these assets on chain, it's all essentially like stuff that's, got a decade now of almost background or just under, right? But then we've got companies, for example, that are, solving challenges around credit, right? And how do you essentially help enable micro credit, to individuals and power hundreds of thousands or millions of loans using this technology? How do you track goods going into emerging markets? So if you think about like pharmaceuticals and, safe access to whether it's drugs or other types of pharmaceutical products, well, how do you know the authenticity of it, right? And how do you track that? Because there's, plenty of cases of deaths all around the world from inauthentic goods. And so how do you solve that problem? And so we've got a company, for example, tracking, millions and millions of products with some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world using this technology. And then there's a lot of really interesting intersections, right? You take gaming, we talked about Brushna, they're basically building a Canva for video games, and anyone can create a video game in 10 minutes or less. And this is being used now in educational purposes, for entertainment. We invested in a company called Altered State Machine, which is the first company at the intersection of AI, blockchain, and gaming. And the idea was, how do you create, and this was a little bit crazy at the time, by the way. So when we backed them, this was 2018. The idea was almost, how do you create almost like uniqueness in gaming? So think about like the uniqueness of DNA or humans, and how do you create that level of uniqueness in gaming so you can create incredible experiences that are fully unique? And that actually worked really well. And so we basically were the first to enable people to train characters and train all sorts of different things using GPUs, so AI. We launched the first AI football league with FIFA. That blew up. They got acquired recently for, the high, like mid 9-figure number. And, there's really interesting innovations like this that are going to impact all these different areas. Last maybe example is we've got a company that's tracking music streaming. And this is like fully in the background, you don't see it, but one of the challenges you'll see in the music streaming industry is there's a lot of streaming fraud, right? So artists trying to get popular, maybe they're like hiring offshore farms to like help pump their numbers up and, drive plays that obviously cost the both the record labels money, but the streaming services money. So how do you basically eliminate that? But how do you also bridge the gap between the streaming service and the record label, right? Because they're going to have very different opinions probably on what their artists are supposed to be making, and how do you actually bridge that gap? The way it's typically done is there's an audit right in these contracts, and when you exercise the audit right, there's a 2-year audit that kicks off, and this is like pulling teeth, right? And so it's just very painful for all parties involved. Now you've got a real-time auditor called BeatDAP in the middle that's basically, it's private, right? So it's a private blockchain, but it's between basically the record label and the streaming service that helps to basically bridge that gap in real time. And they're basically now the dominant solution globally around this, even though people might not see it on the consumer lens.
I think we will wrap it up now because it's been almost an hour, and we'll move on to dinner from here. And then people can just ask Ali questions directly. Amir, as well, Dr. Lodi. You guys might get approached afterwards, just warning you. But again, thank you so much, Ali. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much to Park Launch, Dr. Lodi, Amir, and all the guests over here. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you.
Thank you.